The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Newark International Airport, casting long shadows across the polished floors as travelers rushed about their day. Among them was the Anderson family, making their way through the bustling terminal with an air of excitement about their upcoming vacation to the Bahamas. Dr. James Anderson walked slightly ahead of the group, pulling two sleek silver suitcases while checking his phone for any last-minute messages from the hospital. As one of the city's top neurosurgeons, he was rarely able to completely disconnect from work, but he had promised his family that this vacation would be different. His warm brown eyes crinkled at the corners as he glanced back at his family, feeling grateful for this precious time together. His wife Michelle walked beside their children, a hand occasionally reaching out to guide them through the crowd. As a corporate attorney who had just won a major case, she had finally managed to clear her schedule for their first proper family vacation in over a year. Her natural hair was styled in elegant twists, and she wore comfortable yet stylish travel clothes, black yoga pants, a flowing cream-colored tunic, and designer sneakers. Their children, Alex and Lily, aged 14 and 12, were absorbed in an animated discussion about their vacation plans. Alex, sporting his favorite basketball team's hoodie, was telling his sister about all the water sports they could try. Lily, wearing a bright yellow sweater that matched her bubbly personality, was more excited about the possibility of swimming with dolphins at the resort. "Dad," Alex called out, quickening his pace to catch up with his father, "how long is the flight going to be?" He grabbed the handle of one of the suitcases, helping his dad navigate through a particularly crowded section of the terminal. Dr. Anderson checked his watch. A graduation gift from his own father years ago, and replied, "About 2.5 hours, buddy. A lot quicker than when we have to wait for regular flights, right?" The family had decided to fly private this time, a luxury they occasionally allowed themselves due to their demanding schedules and the flexibility it offered. It wasn't something they did for every trip, but with both parents having just completed major professional achievements, they had decided to splurge a little. Michelle pulled their boarding documents from her designer tote bag, double-checking they were heading in the right direction. The private aviation terminal was in a different section of the airport, away from the main passenger areas. As they walked, she pointed out various shops and restaurants to keep the kids entertained. "Look, they opened that ice cream place you like," she said to Lily, who immediately brightened at the prospect of her favorite mint chocolate chip flavor. "Can we get some before we leave?" Lily asked, her eyes hopeful. The young girl had inherited her mother's negotiating skills and knew exactly how to time her requests. "We'll see," Michelle laughed, sharing an amused look with her husband. "Let's get through security first." As they made their way past the busy check-in counters, Dr. Anderson noticed several people doing double takes as his family walked by. He was used to it by now. A well-dressed black family confidently striding past the regular check-in lines often drew attention. He kept his head high and maintained his warm smile, something his father had taught him years ago. "Success is the best response to prejudice, son." The family's Louis Vuitton luggage rolled smoothly across the floor as they approached the private aviation section of the airport. Alex and Lily had started a game of I Spy, their laughter mixing with the general hubbub of the airport. Michelle had just pulled out their passports, preparing for the upcoming security check. "I think it's this way," Dr. Anderson said, gesturing toward a less crowded corridor. The signs for private aviation were smaller and more discreet than the main terminal's bold directions. The corridor's lighting was softer, and the noise level dropped noticeably as they turned the corner. The family's excitement was palpable. After months of coordinating schedules, sitting through late-night surgeries, handling court cases, and managing school activities, they were finally on their way to a well-deserved break. Little did they know that their journey was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would test their patience and dignity in ways they couldn't imagine. As they approached the private terminal entrance, Michelle adjusted her designer bag and smiled at her children's continuing game. The morning light caught the diamond studs in her ears, an anniversary gift from James, making them sparkle. The terminal's automatic doors slid open smoothly, welcoming them into a world of luxury that some people couldn't imagine them belonging in. What happened next would become a viral moment, capturing both the persistent reality of everyday racism and the sweet satisfaction of seeing prejudice put in its place. But for now, the Andersons were simply a family looking forward to their vacation, unaware that they were about to become the center of attention for all the wrong and then all the right reasons. Patricia Whitmore's morning had not gone according to plan. Her luxury car service had arrived 10 minutes late, her favorite coffee shop at the airport was closed for renovations, and now she stood in the priority check-in line, tapping her expensive heel against the polished floor with growing irritation. She checked her first-class ticket for the 5th time in as many minutes, as if the repeated action might somehow speed up the process. Her carefully styled blonde hair was swept into what she considered a sophisticated updo, though several strands had already escaped due to her constant fidgeting. She wore a cream-colored designer blazer over a silk blouse, paired with tailored pants that probably cost more than some people's monthly rent. A large diamond ring sparkled on her finger as she repeatedly checked her rose gold watch. Another nervous habit she developed over years of believing her time was more valuable than everyone else's. "This is ridiculous," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I pay too much for first class to be standing in line like this." A few people shifted uncomfortably away from her, already sensing the negative energy radiating from her presence. The line had barely moved in the past 10 minutes, and Patricia's patience was wearing thinner by the second. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her social media feed while occasionally glancing up to glare at the airline staff as if they were personally responsible for her inconvenience. That's when she noticed the Anderson family walking past the main check-in area. Her eyes narrowed as she watched them, her judgment immediate and harsh. The father's expensive watch caught her attention first, followed by the mother's designer bag. She straightened up, crane-like, to get a better look at their luggage. "Well, would you look at that?" she whispered to nobody in particular, though she hoped the woman next to her would engage in some gossip. The woman quickly became absorbed in her phone instead, wanting no part of whatever was brewing. Patricia's eyes tracked the family's movement through the terminal, her face twisting into an expression that revealed every ugly assumption crossing her mind. She watched as they confidently walked past the regular check-in lines, her eyebrows rising higher with each step they took. "Those people can't possibly," she started to say, then stopped herself, realizing she was speaking out loud. But her thoughts continued their prejudiced spiral. The Louis Vuitton luggage, the designer clothes, the confident stride, none of it computed in her narrow worldview. A young man standing behind Patricia in line had noticed her reaction and was discreetly recording on his phone, having seen this type of situation unfold before. His intuition told him something was about to happen, and he wasn't wrong. Patricia continued to watch as the family moved towards a different section of the airport. Her neck craned further, practically standing on her tiptoes now. The children's laughter carried across the terminal, seeming to personally offend her somehow. She checked her watch again, then her ticket, then back at the family. The priority check-in line continued to move at a snail's pace, and Patricia's agitation grew with each passing moment. She kept glancing between the slow-moving line and the Anderson family, who were now approaching the private aviation terminal entrance. Something inside her seemed to snap. "This is unacceptable," she declared loudly, gathering her designer handbag and rolling carry-on. Several people in line looked up, startled by her sudden proclamation. The young man behind her steadied his phone, still recording. Without a word to anyone, Patricia stepped out of line, her heels clicking against the floor with determined purpose. Her face had set into what some might call a customer service complaint expression, lips pursed, eyes narrowed, chin lifted with self-righteous indignation. A few people in line exchanged knowing looks. An older gentleman shook his head sadly, recognizing what was about to unfold. A group of teenagers nearby pulled out their phones, sensing the approaching drama. The air in the terminal seemed to thicken with tension. Patricia's designer heels clicked faster against the floor as she picked up her pace, her rolling suitcase wobbling behind her like an unfaithful sidekick. Her blazer fluttered slightly as she walked, giving her the appearance of a bird of prey closing in on its target. She had already constructed an entire narrative in her head about why these people couldn't possibly be heading where they appeared to be going. The thoughts that ran through her mind were a testament to her prejudices she would never admit to having, even as she acted on them in broad daylight. As she approached the family, she rehearsed what she would say in her head, convinced she was about to perform some sort of civic duty. Her hand clutched her first-class ticket tighter, as if it were a badge of authority. The airport's morning light streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows across the terminal floor. In those shadows, Patricia's approaching figure looked almost comical, one woman, armed with nothing but entitlement and prejudice, about to learn a very public lesson about making assumptions. More phones had come out now, as if the people around them could sense what was about to happen. The young man who had first started recording had been joined by several others, all of them seemingly aware that they were about to witness something that needed to be documented. Patricia was just a few steps away from the Anderson family now, her face set with determination, completely unaware that she was about to become the latest example of public prejudice exposed. She cleared her throat, preparing to speak, utterly oblivious to the fact that her next actions would soon make her infamous across social media platforms worldwide. The confrontation began like a bolt of lightning on a clear day, sudden, harsh, and impossible to ignore. Patricia planted herself directly in the Andersons' path, her designer heels squeaking slightly on the polished floor as she came to an abrupt stop. The family halted their peaceful conversation, caught off guard by this unexpected obstacle. "Excuse me," Patricia's voice carried that particular tone of false politeness that barely masked her contempt. "I couldn't help but notice you seem a bit lost." She clutched her first-class ticket in front of her like a shield, her knuckles white with tension. Dr. Anderson instinctively stepped slightly in front of his family, his expression calm but cautious. Years of handling high-pressure situations in the operating room had taught him how to maintain his composure, but this was different. This wasn't about saving lives. This was about protecting his family's dignity. "We're not lost, ma'am," he replied evenly, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone used to commanding operating rooms. "We're exactly where we need to be." Michelle placed a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder, feeling her daughter tense up beside her. Alex had stopped scrolling on his phone, his eyes now fixed on the scene unfolding before him. The excitement about dolphins and water sports had evaporated from the children's faces, replaced by a familiar wariness that no child should have to learn. "Oh, I don't think so," Patricia continued, her voice rising slightly. "The regular check-in lines are back that way." She pointed dramatically toward the main terminal, her diamond ring catching the light. "You can't just walk around wherever you please. There are rules." By now, a small crowd had begun to gather. Phones were raised like periscopes above the sea of onlookers, their cameras capturing every moment. A young couple nearby exchanged disgusted looks at Patricia's behavior, while an elderly gentleman shook his head sadly. Actually, Michelle stepped forward, her legal training evident in her measured response. "We're heading to the private aviation terminal. Now, if you'll excuse us." She gestured for her family to move forward, but Patricia shifted to block their path again. "The private terminal?" Patricia let out a laugh that echoed unnaturally in the space. "Don't be ridiculous. That's for—" She caught herself, but her expression completed the sentence more clearly than words ever could. The terminal's usual buzz of activity had dulled to a murmur, as if the whole airport was holding its breath. A flight attendant walking past slowed her stride, assessing whether she needed to intervene. The young man who had first started recording was now live-streaming, his commentary barely a whisper. "You're not going to believe what's happening right now." Dr. Anderson took a deep breath, his hand instinctively touching the hospital ID card still clipped to his carry-on bag, a reminder of who he was and everything he'd achieved. "Ma'am, I don't know who you think you are, but you don't have any authority to question where my family and I are going." "I am a first-class passenger," Patricia announced, waving her ticket like it was some sort of federal badge. "And I've been flying through this airport for 20 years. I know exactly where everything is, and people like you don't just wander into the private terminal area." "People like us?" Michelle's voice was steel wrapped in silk. She dealt with similar situations in courtrooms and boardrooms, but having it happen in front of her children made her blood boil. Still, she maintained her composure, years of legal training kicking in. Lily tugged at her mother's sleeve, whispering, "Mom, why is she doing this?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications that no parent ever wants their child to have to understand. More phones had joined the first, recording the scene from various angles. A group of teenage girls nearby were already posting to their social media accounts, their fingers flying across their screens. One whispered to another, "This lady's about to learn today." Patricia seemed energized by the attention, as if the gathering crowd validated her actions. "I'm simply trying to maintain order," she declared, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone who believed they were performing a public service. "You can't just walk around like you own the place." The irony of her statement was not lost on the onlookers, several of whom exchanged knowing looks. A business traveler in a sharp suit had paused his phone call to watch, shaking his head in disbelief. An airport janitor who had been cleaning nearby stood still, his mop forgotten in his hands as he witnessed the scene. "Actually," Dr. Anderson began, but Patricia cut him off with a wave of her hand. "I'm calling security," she announced, reaching for her phone. "This has gone far enough. These people are clearly in the wrong area and refusing to cooperate." Alex, who had been quietly recording the entire interaction on his phone, caught his father's eye. There was a question in his look, a silent asking of how to handle this situation. Dr. Anderson gave his son a subtle nod, one that seemed to say, "Watch and learn how to handle ignorance with dignity." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Travelers hurrying to their gates slowed their pace as they passed, drawn into the drama unfolding before them. A mother with young children quickened her pace as she walked by, pulling her kids closer as if prejudice might be contagious. Just as Patricia began dialing on her phone, her face flushed with self-righteous indignation. Movement at the private terminal entrance caught everyone's attention. Help was about to arrive, but not in the way Patricia expected. The automatic doors slid open smoothly, and a familiar face to the Andersons appeared, about to turn this entire situation on its head. Patricia's confrontation with the Anderson family had reached a boiling point. Her face was now flushed red with anger, and her perfectly manicured finger jabbed the air as she spoke, each gesture more aggressive than the last. The terminal's morning light cast harsh shadows across her contorted features, making her appear almost theatrical in her rage. "I've had enough of this nonsense," she practically spat the words, her phone still clutched in her trembling hand. "Security will sort this out. They'll escort you right back to where you belong." The way she emphasized belong made several onlookers visibly wince. Dr. Anderson remained surprisingly calm, though anyone watching closely enough could see the subtle tension in his jaw. He'd spent years in high-pressure situations where losing composure could cost lives, but this was testing even his well-practiced patience. His hand found its way to his son Alex's shoulder, both to comfort and to keep him steady. "Mom," Lally whispered, pressing closer to Michelle, "everyone's staring at us." Indeed, the crowd had grown larger. Phones were everywhere now, recording from every angle. Some people weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. This had become a public spectacle. Michelle felt her daughter's discomfort and wrapped an arm around her protectively. As a lawyer, she knew exactly how this kind of situation could escalate, and she was already thinking 10 steps ahead. "It's okay, sweetie," she said softly. "Sometimes people show us exactly who they are, and that's their problem, not ours." Patricia overheard this and seemed to grow even more indignant. "Oh, so I'm the problem here. I'm just trying to maintain order. You people are clearly in the wrong place, and instead of admitting it, you're making a scene." A young woman in the crowd couldn't contain herself any longer. "The only person making a scene is you, lady," she called out. Several others murmured in agreement, but Patricia seemed beyond caring about public opinion. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Patricia's voice had risen to a near shriek. "I'm a platinum member with this airline. I've been flying first class for longer than your children have been alive." She waved her ticket again, as if it was some sort of royal decree. Dr. Anderson's response was measured but firm. "And do you have any idea who we are? Not that it should matter, but since you seem so concerned about status." He was cut off by Patricia's dismissive hand wave. "Oh, please," she sneered, looking pointedly at their designer luggage and clothes. "I know exactly what's going on here. You're probably using stolen credit cards or something. Real success doesn't look like." "Don't you dare finish that sentence." Michelle stepped forward, her professional demeanor crackling with controlled anger. "You've said quite enough already." The lawyer in her was documenting every word, every implication, even as the mother in her wanted to shield her children from this ugly display of prejudice. Alex had been quietly filming the entire interaction on his phone, his hands steady despite his anger. He'd seen this kind of thing before, at school, at the mall, even at his father's hospital when people didn't realize Dr. Anderson was the chief surgeon. But this was different. This was blatant, public, and being recorded from multiple angles. Security. Patricia was now practically yelling into her phone. Yes, I need assistance at the private aviation terminal entrance. There's a group here that needs to be removed. She paused, listening to the response on the other end. What do you mean, you need more information? They clearly don't belong here. The crowd had grown larger still. A pilot walking past had stopped to observe, his face darkening as he understood what was happening. A group of flight attendants stood nearby, whispering among themselves and looking concerned. One had already picked up a phone, apparently making a call of her own. Dad, Alex said quietly, shouldn't we just show her our boarding passes? His father shook his head slightly. No, son, Dr. Anderson replied, loud enough for others to hear. We don't owe anyone proof of our right to exist in any space. It was a lesson he'd learned long ago, and one he was now passing on to his children, though he wished it didn't have to be this way. Patricia was now pacing in a small circle, her designer heels clicking against the floor like an angry metronome. This is ridiculous. I know every high-level passenger who uses this terminal, and I have never seen you people here before. The way she said you people caused another ripple of disapproval through the crowd. Someone in the back shouted, Lady, it's 2025, not 1955. But Patricia seemed to be in too deep to back down now. Michelle checked her watch. They still had plenty of time before their flight, but this situation needed to end. She could see how it was affecting her children, how Lily's excitement about swimming with dolphins had been replaced by this ugly lesson in human nature. I'm not moving until security gets here, Patricia declared, planting herself firmly in their path. Someone needs to teach you about appropriate boundaries and respecting proper procedures. The irony of her talking about boundaries while physically blocking their path wasn't lost on anyone. Several people in the crowd had started live streaming the encounter, their commentary a mix of disbelief and outrage. Just then, movement near the private terminal entrance caught everyone's attention. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and a familiar figure emerged. Patricia's moment of reckoning was about to arrive, though not in the way she expected. The crowd seemed to collectively hold its breath, sensing that the situation was about to take a dramatic turn. Thomas Chen, the private terminal manager, emerged from the automatic doors with the smooth confidence of someone who'd handled every type of situation imaginable in his 15 years of luxury aviation service. His crisp navy suit and warm smile were carefully cultivated to put high-end clients at ease, but today his usual peaceful expression was replaced by one of concern as he took in the scene before him. Dr. Anderson, he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the space. I thought I heard a commotion out here. Is everything all right? He moved quickly toward the group, his dress shoes making soft clicks against the polished floor. Patricia's head whipped around at the sound of his voice, her eyes widening as she watched the terminal manager approach. The crowd, which had grown to nearly 30 people, collectively leaned forward, sensing the turning point that was about to unfold. Tom, Dr. Anderson replied with evident relief, we were just on our way in when we encountered this situation. He gestured slightly toward Patricia, who had frozen in place, her phone still clutched in her hand. Thomas's face lit up with recognition as he looked at the rest of the family. Mrs. Anderson, always a pleasure. And look how tall the kids have gotten since your last flight with us. He smiled warmly at Alex and Lily, who returned his greeting with visible relief. Patricia's mouth opened and closed several times, no words coming out. Her perfectly manicured hand lowered her phone slowly, the call to security forgotten. The crowd watched with satisfaction as realization began to dawn on her face. I've already had the cabin crew stock your favorite snacks, Thomas continued, speaking to the children. And yes, Lily, they remembered the special hot chocolate you like. He turned to Michelle. We've also arranged for those magazines you requested for the flight. A young woman in the crowd whispered loudly to her friend, Oh snap, this is getting good. Several phones adjusted their angles to capture Patricia's rapidly changing expression. There must be some mistake. Patricia finally managed to sputter, her voice having lost its previous authority. These people, they were just wandering around. They can't possibly. Thomas's warm demeanor cooled noticeably as he turned to address her. "Ma'am, I couldn't help but overhear your concerns about our private terminal clients. I should inform you that Dr. Anderson and his family have been valued members of our private aviation program for the past 5 years." The gathered crowd murmured appreciatively. Someone in the back whispered, "Get her, Tom." A flight attendant who had been watching covered her smile with her hand. "In fact," Thomas continued, his voice taking on a slightly firmer tone, "Dr. Anderson's Gulfstream G650 is being prepared for departure right now. Would you like me to explain why you're actually the one in the wrong area?" His emphasis on wrong area was subtle but unmistakable. Patricia's face had turned from red to pale, her designer bag clutched tightly against her chest like a shield. The first-class ticket she'd been waving around like a weapon now hung limply at her side, suddenly seeming far less impressive. At that moment, a golf cart with the private terminal's logo pulled up silently. The driver, wearing a crisp uniform, nodded respectfully to the Anderson family. "Your transportation is ready, Dr. Anderson. We've already loaded your luggage onto the aircraft." Lily's face brightened at the sight of the cart. "Mom, it's Ryan. He always gives us extra cookies from the terminal kitchen." The young driver grinned and gave her a friendly wink, the normal warmth of their usual airport routine beginning to return. Michelle placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder, the tension in her body finally starting to ease. The familiar faces of the private terminal staff were helping to restore the excitement of their vacation that had been temporarily stolen from them. Now, Thomas addressed Patricia directly. "I believe you mentioned something about calling security." His tone was professional but carried a clear warning. "Should I have them meet you back at the main terminal where you actually belong?" The crowd's collective woo was impossible to miss. Several people had covered their mouths to hide their grins, while others nodded in satisfaction at the manager's subtle but effective comeback. Patricia clutched her carry-on bag closer, her earlier confidence completely deflated. I was just trying to," she began, but Thomas held up a hand politely but firmly. "I think you've done quite enough trying for one day, ma'am. Now, if you'll excuse us, I need to escort our valued clients to their private lounge. Their champagne is already chilling, and we don't want it to get warm." He turned back to the Andersons with a warm smile. "Shall we?" The crowd parted like the Red Sea as Thomas gestured for the family to board the waiting golf cart. Alex helped his sister up while Dr. Anderson assisted Michelle, their usual airport routine finally resuming. The normalcy of the moment somehow made Patricia's behavior seem even more ridiculous in retrospect. "Oh, and Mom?" Thomas called over his shoulder to Patricia, who looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. "The first-class check-in you're looking for is back that way." He pointed in the direction she had come from. "Though you might want to work on your customer service skills before your next flight." The revelation hit Patricia like a tidal wave, washing away her manufactured confidence and leaving her standing in a puddle of her own embarrassment. The private terminal's elegant lighting seemed to spotlight her discomfort as the truth of her actions began to sink in. Her designer blazer suddenly felt too tight, her expensive heels too unstable. "A Gulfstream G650. She whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Being a self-proclaimed aviation enthusiast, she knew exactly what that meant. The aircraft she was referring to cost more than she'd earned in several lifetimes. Her first-class ticket, which she'd been wielding like a royal scepter just moments ago, now felt like a child's plaything in comparison. The crowd that had gathered wasn't dispersing. If anything, it was growing larger as word spread through the terminal about what was happening. The young man who'd started the original recording was now narrating quietly to his live stream. "You'll won't believe what this lady just did, and wait till you see how it ended." Patricia's phone buzzed in her hand, probably security calling back about her complaint. She quickly declined the call, her face flushing a deeper shade of red. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone present. She'd been so certain she was protecting her space from intruders, only to discover she was the one who didn't belong. I didn't realize," she stammered, looking around desperately for an alley but finding none. Even the other first-class passengers who'd been in line with her earlier were shaking their heads in disapproval. Thomas, the terminal manager, maintained his professional demeanor, but couldn't completely hide his satisfaction as he helped the Anderson family settle into the golf cart. "Dr. Anderson, we've taken the liberty of having your car detailed while you're away. It'll be ready in the private lot when you return next week." The casual mention of yet another luxury service seemed to make Patricia physically wince. She watched as Lily happily settled into her seat, the young girl's earlier fear replaced by the return of her vacation excitement. The contrast between the joy she'd tried to steal from this family and their dignified recovery was stark. "Would anyone else like to question our credentials?" Dr. Anderson asked quietly, his voice carrying just far enough for Patricia to hear. It wasn't asked with malice, but the point was clear. Michelle placed a gentle hand on his arm, a subtle reminder that they had already won this battle. A group of teenage girls nearby were rapidly typing on their phones, their whispered commentary carrying clearly in the terminal. "This is going viral for sure. Did you see her face when she found out about the private jet? Wait till TikTok sees this." Patricia's carefully curated image of superiority had crumbled completely. Her Louis Vuitton bag, which probably cost a month's salary, suddenly seemed like a cheap imitation next to the Andersons' quiet wealth. But more than that, her actions had revealed something far uglier than any fashion faux pas. "Perhaps, ma'am," Thomas addressed Patricia one final time, "next time you'll remember that success and class don't look like any one thing." He turned to his staff who had gathered nearby. "Please ensure that security knows this situation has been resolved, though they might want to escort this lady back to the main terminal." A young boy in the crowd tugged at his mother's sleeve and asked, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Mom, why was that angry lady being so mean to those nice people?" The innocent question caused several onlookers to nod in agreement, while Patricia seemed to shrink even further into herself. Alex, still recording on his phone, caught his father's attention. "Dad, can I post this later?" Dr. Anderson shook his head slightly. "No need, son. I think plenty of other people have documented this moment." Indeed, dozens of phones were still raised, capturing every second of Patricia's humiliation. The golf cart's electric motor hummed softly as it prepared to move. "Oh, one more thing," Thomas added, turning back to Patricia. "We keep a list of people who disturb our private terminal clients. I'll make sure our security team has your photo. You know, just to maintain order." His professional smile never wavered as he threw her own words back at her. A slow ripple of approval moved through the crowd. Someone in the back started a slow clap, which quickly spread until the entire terminal echoed with applause, not for Patricia's performance, but for the dignity with which the Anderson family had handled the situation. Patricia finally began to back away, her designer heels catching slightly on the polished floor. Her retreat was far less confident than her earlier aggressive approach had been. She turned to flee back to the main terminal, only to find her path blocked by the same crowd that had gathered to watch her performance. "Excuse me," she mumbled, her voice barely audible now. "I need to. My flight." The crowd parted slowly, but not before several people had something to say. "Check your privilege next time, lady. This isn't 1950. Hope this goes viral. Being first class doesn't make you first rate." Each comment seemed to land like a physical blow as Patricia scurried back toward the main terminal, her rolling suitcase now wobbling pathetically behind her like a faithful dog that had just watched its owner embarrass herself completely. As the Andersons' golf cart glided smoothly toward their private terminal, the aftermath of the confrontation rippled through the airport like waves in a pond. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse, but their phones remained active, sharing the incident across social media platforms with lightning speed. Within hours, the hashtag #PrivateJetKaren would be trending nationwide. Inside the private terminal's luxurious lounge, the Anderson family finally had a moment to process what had just happened. The space was beautifully appointed with leather chairs, soft lighting, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a perfect view of their waiting aircraft. "Dad," Alex said, setting down his phone on the marble-topped coffee table, "that was intense. But you and Mom handled it so well." He looked at his parents with a mixture of pride and curiosity, sensing there was a deeper lesson to be learned. Dr. Anderson took a sip of the perfectly brewed coffee that the lounge staff had prepared exactly to his preference. "You know, son, what you saw today wasn't just about a private jet or someone's assumptions. It was about dignity and how you maintain it even when others try to strip it away. Lily, who had been unusually quiet since they entered the lounge, looked up from her hot chocolate. But why did she think we didn't belong here? We fly private all the time. The innocent question hung in the air, heavy with implications that no 12-year-old should have to understand. Michelle moved to sit beside her daughter, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. Sometimes, sweetie, people have ideas in their heads about who should have access to certain things. But you know what? Their small-minded assumptions are their problem, not ours. The lounge staff moved quietly around them, preparing their favorite snacks and ensuring everything was perfect for their flight, but they couldn't help casting admiring glances at the family. Word had spread quickly about how they'd handled the situation with grace. "I've already received 3 messages from other parents at school," Michelle mentioned, checking her phone. "The video is spreading fast." She paused, considering something. "You know, this could be a teaching moment for a lot of people." Outside the terminal's tinted windows, they could see their Gulfstream being prepared for takeoff. The sight of the magnificent aircraft seemed to carry extra significance now, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a reminder that success knows no color. Thomas, the terminal manager, entered the lounge with his characteristic smooth efficiency. "Dr. Anderson, I've just received calls from several news outlets. They're interested in your story. Of course, we'll handle them according to your wishes." Dr. Anderson shook his head slightly. "No need for official statements. The videos speak for themselves. Sometimes the most powerful message is simply living your life without apologizing for your success." Meanwhile, in the main terminal, Patricia's story was taking a different turn. As she finally made her way to her correct gate, her phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. The videos had already begun circulating, and her face was becoming recognizable for all the wrong reasons. Back in the private lounge, Alex was scrolling through social media reactions. "Mom, people are saying you're their hero. The way you stayed so calm but stood your ground, it's inspiring people." Michelle smiled softly. "The real heroes are the everyday people who stood up and said something. Did you notice how many strangers spoke up? That's how change happens, one voice at a time." Lily had moved to the window, watching the ground crew prepare their aircraft. "Look," she exclaimed, her earlier excitement returning. "They're loading my dolphin swimming gear." The simple joy in her voice was a reminder that children's dreams shouldn't be overshadowed by adults' prejudices. A young flight attendant approached with a tablet. "Mrs. Anderson, I've updated the in-flight menu with everyone's preferences. And yes, Lily, we remembered your special meal for the dolphins." She winked at the young girl, helping to restore the vacation atmosphere that had been temporarily disrupted. As the family prepared to board their flight, Dr. Anderson gathered them for a moment. "You know what makes me proudest?" he asked, looking at each family member. "It's not the jet or the success or even handling that situation well. It's that we stayed true to who we are." The story of their encounter would continue to spread, becoming a viral moment that sparked important conversations about prejudice and assumptions. But more importantly, it would serve as an inspiration, showing how grace under pressure and quiet dignity can be the most powerful responses to ignorance. As they walked across the tarmac to their waiting aircraft, the morning sun finally broke fully through the clouds, bathing everything in warm light. Lily skipped ahead, her excitement about swimming with dolphins restored. Alex walked tall, having learned valuable lessons about handling difficult situations with dignity. Michelle and James exchanged a knowing look. They had turned an ugly moment into a teaching opportunity for their children. Just before boarding, Dr. Anderson paused at the bottom of the stairs, taking in the scene. The private terminal gleamed in the distance, the main terminal bustled with activity, and somewhere in between, important lessons about prejudice and presumption were still echoing through the corridors. "Ready for takeoff?" the pilot called down cheerfully. "More than ready," Dr. Anderson replied, climbing the stairs to join his family. As the door closed behind them, they left behind not just the airport, but also a powerful message about success, dignity, and the importance of never letting anyone else's prejudices define your worth. The Gulfstream's engines hummed to life, and as they taxied toward the runway, Lily's voice rang out clear and excited. "Next stop, dolphins." The family laughed together, the tension of the morning finally melting away completely. They had handled an ugly situation with grace, taught their children valuable lessons about dignity and resilience, and still managed to keep their vacation spirit intact. In the end, that was perhaps the greatest victory of all.